I think we have a picture of you at the U.S. Olympic Track and Field Trials in Eugene, Oregon. So what kind of things did you get to do, to the extent that you can share a little bit about that?
Yeah, so that was an interesting experience because with counter UAS being relatively new and some of the authorities to do certain things being relatively new, we had to really thoughtfully think about how we were going to conduct this mission without increasing risk to the national airspace or increasing risk to the public that we're trying to protect. And so we had to be very thoughtful about how we did things, knowing that if we didn't conduct this mission carefully, it could impact the expansion of these capabilities down the road. And so we really worked hard to do the mission the right way and to have some good rules of engagement and ways to do things that were very thoughtful and protected without impacting safety. And so we learned a lot from that. There were some times when at the end of a mission we'd be like, what, that didn't work very well. We need to figure something out how to do it differently or better. And doing these missions in urban environments in the homeland are really a lot different than doing it overseas. Not better or worse or the same. It's just there's different considerations that you need to keep in mind when you're doing this mission. So I learned a lot. It was a great time. We had a great team. It was a lot of traveling, a lot of hard work, heavy lifting, carrying stuff. Heavy equipment, installing, setting up networks, conducting missions, after action reviews, packing up, going home, and doing it all over again at another event. But I had a great opportunity to work with state and local law enforcement around the U.S., work with people from some of the major sports leagues and high-profile venues around the U.S., and learned a lot from them too along the way. It was a great experience.
And you were literally writing the playbook. I think we have a picture of you standing in front of the Artemis 1 rocket at the Kennedy Space Center. If we can, here we go. So you talk about sensitive environments. I mean, not just urban, but look at that hardware behind you. I mean, that's something if you're doing a counter UAS mission, because you can't have a drone flying around that launch pad. I imagine there's so much sensitive equipment. You need to do that right. So you definitely, I will call it a trial by fire.
The more you prepare, the better prepared you are.
And, one of those groups I think that helps prepare a lot of young men in the United States. We had another guest, Greg Fortier from SAIC, who kind of picked somewhat of a Boy Scout theme, or the United States Boy Scouts. And I know you were very involved with that group. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so, the Boy Scout model is be prepared. And actually started as a Cub Scout and a Boy Scout. And even later on in life, I became a Scoutmaster. I'm now Scoutmaster Emeritus, have my own troop. It's actually celebrating its 100th year this year as a Boy Scout troop. But when I was in Boy Scouts, I found out that they had this thing called career exploring. So they had law enforcement exploring. So I ended up joining the Sheriff's Department and becoming a Sheriff's Explorer, which was amazing. It really... And what started that was I went on a tour of the FBI headquarters back when I was 12 years old, went to Washington, D.C., and I thought it was the coolest thing I've ever seen. You go in the very end, you see the shooter at the end of the tour. They have the indoor range, and they do all the trick shooting and everything. I thought it was the coolest thing ever. And I never thought I'd be able to get into the FBI, but that's what got me on the law enforcement path, and it became my calling. So 12, and then I found out about Sheriff's Exploring. 16, I joined the Sheriff's Department in Portland, Oregon, Multnomah County. Huge impact on my life because that same motto as train as you play or train as you fly, because you get into hairy situations in law enforcement. And I remember my training sergeants telling me, if you forget something or you make a mistake, stop, reassess, and move on. Don't just keep blundering forward, and you can salvage the situation. So, that was great. I was 16 years old when I found my first body on an evidence search. And then, I was 17.
So I back up. Wait a minute. So first of all, whoa. But second of all, how do you join a sheriff's office at the age of 16? So were you actually employed by them? Were you like a volunteer?
It's a volunteer.
Yeah.
So what it is, in some departments across the U.S., they're cadets, but Boy Scouts has a program where career exploring. So you actually get sworn in as an explorer. They send you through a an academy that teaches you how to do it, and it's basically to teach young people about law enforcement. But they used us. So I did traffic control. We did evidence searches. So if we had to do a grid search, you go out and help the sheriffs find it. The very first one was a person they were looking for. He was in the woods. He ended up committing suicide, but I ended up finding him. So I was the only one that found him too. So I was with the dead body for like an hour and a half before they
Oh
could
my
catch up to
gosh.
me.
I first of all, I've never been in the physical presence on a crime scene of a dead body. I've seen photos. And being a prosecutor working with the Air Force Office of Special Investigation, or AFOSI, which is the Air Force's version of the FBI, right?
Yeah.
Being one
Love
of
those
the
guys.
legal, yeah, they're awesome. But like those are things that, like, you kind of never forget. And I can't even imagine being 16, coming upon this dead body, having to stay with it, especially as you said, a suicide, so it probably wasn't a pretty scene. How did that, I mean, obviously you forged on, and we're going to get to your later career, and ultimately, spoiler alert, you did become FBI. But it didn't dissuade you, like that's incredible.
Well, I thought it was so cool because I was tracking the person through the forest. I
Right,
found him, and I was all brave, and I thought it was really cool when I first got there. But the more that time went along,
Yeah.
I was afraid. I've seen too many zombie movies, and so I was afraid he was going to stand up. So I ended up hiding behind a tree until they caught up. Because if he was going to move, I was getting the hell out of there. But
Yeah.
but from there, it was great because I actually got to work on. I ended up spending a lot of time working with robbery homicide, as I just thought it was the coolest thing. And the same thing with what we now call CSU. And
Yeah.
so I, do evidence recovery, so I rappel down ravines. I actually got to work on 2 serial murder investigations.
Wow.
And
As
during
a
the
young
time,
person, how old were
yeah,
you?
as teenager, yeah.
I mean, I've never heard of such a thing. And first of all, I learned something already, not only about you, but I had no idea the Boy Scouts had such a robust program with law enforcement to, shape those careers. And then for that, good on the sheriff's office that you worked with to give someone of your age that kind of like responsibility and experience, because I think that's kind of like, I think you see that somewhat in the military, in some services, depending on the career field. But I think that is rare to entrust someone that is so young with that kind of awesome responsibility. So wow, that's amazing. Now you're talking about rappelling through, tracking, lost folks in woods, and rappelling down ravines and whatnot. A lot of physicality to that. You said you were outside most of your life in Portland, Oregon. Martial arts was a big part of your background as well. So tell us a little bit about that. And was this like in tandem with the Boy Scouts? In other words, were you pursuing your martial arts as you were doing all these other things?
I was. So it early on, I started enjoying it, and then it tied into law enforcement. And so, I mean, I studied everything that I could, any styles, Taekwondo, karate, Kung Fu. Hapkido became one of the my favorite styles, which is a Korean version of karate, judo, and jujitsu all move in style. And really throughout, from my teenage years all the way through my career, because I became a defensive tactics instructor at the U.S. Marshal Service, and then later at the FBI. So it was, because it's the same thing. It comes down to train as you fly. It's, the whole thing about being prepared, how to avoid a fight, but also if you have to get into it, what do you have to do? It's that kind. And honestly, the real idea behind it was this concept of train as you fly is no mind in martial arts, meaning you've trained it so many times, it's muscle memory. So professional athletes, the military, martial artists, you do it over and over again so that when an event happens, especially in cybersecurity or critical incidents, you know what to do. It's another day.
Right.
It may not be a good day, but it's just another day. Where a lot of times I see with companies now, especially that are the victim of an incident, it shuts the entire company down. They don't know what to do. They haven't trained. They don't have a plan. And now that it's going on, that's not the time to figure it out.
No, absolutely. And you don't know this about me, Trent, but I actually have a black belt in Taekwondo.
Yeah. Okay.
I do, and hand foot art. So it's
Yeah.
not one of those things that you would necessarily be using to defend yourself, but I did it when my boys were little. We went through together and took a couple years. It was something I was pretty proud of, but when I think of that time and the discipline that it took, not only to show up 3 times a week, to work our way through every single level of belt, but even just to memorize those forms, which is what they call all the different movements. It's usually
Oh,
a
God,
pattern of
yeah.
over 20 plus movements, and the more, advanced, the harder they get. Just I get that. I get the idea of train as you fly and the discipline and having that muscle memory. Because if you have to still count in your head by the time you're taking that test, you're not going to pass, right? Like you're not going to,
Right.
you just have to do it, and then it becomes memory, and it's really awesome. So that is so cool. So wow, so much going on there. And just back in the day, right, whether it's a Boy Scouts or one of your masters in karate or taekwondo, or even your family. You mentioned your
Mhm.
dad was a big influence. Is there like one saying or something that jumps out, resonates with you, that to this day you still remember from like a leadership perspective?
Act. It really comes down to it. It's like, and what that means, it comes into trust your instincts. Really, honestly, you have like 30 to 45 seconds that's a long time to act, but your instincts should be kicking in to a situation before it happens. And if you're in that golden 45-second window, do something, move, because that'll save you. A lot of same thing in law enforcement. If you're walking down that alley and it doesn't feel right, it's
The
not.
spidey
Trust your
sense.
instinct. Yeah, your
Yeah,
spidey
it's just
sense.
like there's something to that, huh?
Change something, do something. Don't just go, oh, I'm just imagining it. So yeah, really, it's trust your instincts is really what's act. And trust your instincts. It is so exciting to have you here today. And, you pick this theme, Jeffrey, of collaborative leadership. So I want to start there. Tell us a little bit about what that means to you.
Well, through my 38-year career in aviation, and I would say probably the past 20 years I've been spent in some type of leadership role. One of the things that I've learned is that when you include stakeholders or the people that work for you in the decisions, they tend to buy into it. A lot of times we think of leadership, and I was a former military person also. A lot of times we think about that as command and control. But one of the things I've learned is you've got to include everybody in your decisions. And I find it's very rare that I have to make a decision that is just has to be done right now. It's so urgent that I have to do it right now that I don't have time to talk to my management team. I don't have time to talk to other employees or other stakeholders to get input. And I find that when you get that input and you talk to everyone else, your decisions generally people buy into them. And I find that probably 99% of the time, those decisions usually work out. In the times when they don't work out, you go back and you sit down, you talk again with your management team or your employees, and you explain the why. Or in those rare occasions where you really, really don't have time to consult with anybody else and make a decision, again, if you've done that in the past and you go back and you sit down and you explain the why and why you made the decisions, I found it's been readily accepted by the employees. And it's the best way I've seen to get buy-in from your employees or from your leadership team.
Totally agree 100%. They always say better together. And what's that other trite saying? I think more heads are better than one, right? Like, so when you're trying to come up with some course of action, to have that kind of input is really critical. So I love your theme today. And what I want to do, Jeffrey, is kind of walk this back to the very beginning, to your roots, because you obviously are a collaborator, and I always find there's a little bit of nature, a little bit of nurture in that. And so I love to talk to people about, where they grew up. Tell me a little bit about your family. So let's start there.
Well, I grew up in rural Alabama, a town called Lincoln, And I grew up on a farm, believe it or not. I was a farm boy, and joined the military right after high school. So it's kind of how I got my start. I became an Army air traffic controller. So that's how I got my start into aviation. I think certainly growing up in the rural background and certainly the military background certainly shaped me a lot, especially around working with people, including people. I think that had a huge influence on who I am today.
Absolutely. So I want to talk about, I know where there's another picture rolling here of your early military career, which we're going to get to in a second. But I want to go back to that, just verbally go back to that picture. That was you in high school, leaning against a tree. And for everybody out there, we were talking before the show. I actually have an identical picture of my son, like from 3 years ago for his high school picture, exact pose, leaning against a tree. So I love that. Jeffrey, growing up in Alabama on a farm, were there any formative kind of people or events in your life that really shaped your view of being a collaborative leader?
Well, I think back to something. I would say my father was probably the most influential person in my life, and he always taught me that you could do anything that you wanted to do if you just had the intestinal fortitude to power through that. That you could get there. But I think probably one of the most important things that he instilled in me, that I still talk to my management team about today, and something that I still resonates with me. He always said to me, if success was easy, everybody would be successful. And so it was one of those things that he taught me. If you want to be successful, you got to be willing to work for it. And that's something that has resonated with me through my entire life, is that, I've always been willing to work for what I wanted. And another thing he used to tell me all the time, he says, as a young kid, most of us, there were times when you don't always, and being on a farm, necessarily want to do your work, the things that's required of you. And he used to always tell me, he says, I don't like work either, but it's the results of work that I care about. And that was another thing that's always resonated with me, is that when you want success and you want something to be successful, you have an image or desire of what you want. And I think that also has kind of worked its way into my collaborative nature, is that I have been willing to work for it and knowing that it's going to take hard work to be successful and get there. So those were some of the things that early in my life that kind of resonated with me, and again, that shaped me into the person I am today.
Well, I love that. And also, kind of weaving it back into your theme, as you said, none of us get to be successful without a team and those around us. And by the way, speaking of team, we got a lot of folks out there cheering you on. You've got a cheering squad. Rob Hebert from Workhorse is not only saying roll tide, but thank you for volunteering and serving our nation. Clifford Kistner is saying hello, folks. And of course, Mike Peel is saying excited to hear from Jeffrey. So you've got fans out there already cheering you on, which is so awesome. Is there, you just weaved in a couple really cool things there, Jeffrey. Looking back, is there like one saying that you recall that resonated with you when you were growing up, that stuck with you throughout your life? I know I have one, but do you have one, like a saying that either, your dad or a teacher or somebody said? I mean, you just kind of had two, if you will, philosophies, but any in particular?
Well, there's three that I live by.
All right.
But there's one, I would say, the most important, that did start with my father. Again, you can probably see why I said my father was probably the most influential person in my life. And he used to always tell me, never forget where you came from, or never forget where you started. And that's something that even in any management meeting today, I still talk to my team about that all the time, because we all started somewhere. And my dad's purpose, I think, for telling me that was that, when you started, you probably fell down. You probably were not perfect. You made some mistakes and some stumbles along the way. And in order for you to be sitting there, somebody, probably gave you a second chance, probably allowed you to get up and dust yourself off, or allowed you to make those mistakes. And when I talk about, again, the collaborative leadership, I think probably one of the most important things that we can do as leaders is make sure that people know that there's room to make mistakes. They're not perfect. They're going to make mistakes. And so when you remember what it was like the day that you started, the first day that you sit in the chair, the first day that you assume your leadership position, don't ever forget that. And when you have the junior executive or whatever sitting across the table from you, remember what it was like for you 10 years ago, 15 years ago. They're going through the exact same thing.
Tom, you picked this excellent topic of leading by example, and I want to just dive right in and start there. Why did you pick that topic?
Well, I think it's interesting. You know, we talk about leadership a lot, leadership in the industry, leadership in our companies. And I think one of the things that we really push in our company is acknowledging our role as leaders in the industry and taking that seriously. And one of the things that I always say to the company when I speak to them is acknowledging leadership isn't being arrogant, it isn't being cocky, it's acknowledging a responsibility, a heavy responsibility to hold people accountable, to be willing to be held accountable, both, again, in the industry and within our company. I think it's just an important characteristic that we all need to embrace and learn and improve on all the time.
Well, I couldn't agree more, Tom. I mean, and you know, when you think about leadership, it often starts in the very beginning. So let's go back there in time and tell us a little bit about your upbringing, because oftentimes it's it's your parents, it's those teachers or coaches or other people that really form who you are, especially in terms of leadership, because they lead by example and we watch them. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it's interesting. The most influential person in my life growing up was my grandmother. And let me explain to you why. I grew up in a town called Camden, Arkansas. Most people haven't heard of it. It's frequently referred to in the news as the poorest city in one of the poorest states. So 50% of the folks live below the poverty level. And so we
Wow.
grew up very, very, very poor. Graduated from a high school class of with only 37 in the class. And one of the reasons that I think my grandmother had such an important influence on me is I did not grow up realizing that I was poor. I felt like I had everything. I felt like I felt important. I felt loved. I felt cared for. It wasn't really till I left Arkansas and in the military and looked back and realized, holy cow, we didn't have anything. But she gave me the confidence, the humility, but the confidence to go out and take on the world, not realizing quite where I was coming from.
Well, I love that. Thank you for sharing that, because, you know, uh, richness isn't just about having money, right? It's about having that love that you talked about and those people in your life that inspire you. Was there something, and by the way, I also, my grandma was like one of my favorite people in the whole. Was there a saying or something that she did that kind of stands out in your mind as you think about leading by example?
I don't know that there was any one saying. I think the thing that she always reminded me was, you know, my grandmother didn't have an education, so she wasn't, always articulate, and sometimes I think to others came across as unintelligent, which she wasn't. And so I would always, correct her language when I was in school, and I never really realized kind of how rude and insulting that was. But she would always remind me, your education isn't going to get you anywhere. And every time I would try to tell her how smart I was, her thing was, we survive on this planet by working harder than everyone else. And you don't have to be the smartest person in the world in the room. You just got to be the hardest working person in the room. She really drove that home. And I think, I left home. The first place I went after I left home was to boot camp. And I realized very quickly she was right.
Wow. Well, I think those actually are a couple of amazing sayings about working harder and not having to be that smartest person in the room. And I'll tell you, Tom, I mean, you and I share that military background. Part of my career, I was a prosecutor, and there were a lot of people that had some natural talent, but I'll tell you, and I would tell all of them that worked with me, I would take anybody any day that was willing to put the work in, because they're going to beat you every time. Yesterday, or recently on the Women in Drones session, you talked quite a bit about how the women in your life, your mother, and now of course your sisters, and then your wife and daughter, have really kind of shaped who you are as a person. I don't know if you want to kind of touch that just briefly
Yeah,
before we
I
get
come
a
from
little
I
bit
come
into your education.
Yeah, I come from an Italian family because my mom came from Italian family. My grandparents and my mom's side are Italian. So we have a very strong. All women in my life have very strong character, and they really are the main pillar of my family. From now in my house right now, my wife, and that was my mom and my grandmother. They were very strong women, and I have a huge admiration for them. So they play a very important role in my life, and I have. Yesterday was a little emotional. You remember that, and
I
and I will
do.
get emotional if I go through this. So they're very important to me for sure.
Well, and clearly education has been a big part of your experience. And Ed, I think you'll agree that as we look at these great leaders out there, in the world, they're lifelong learners. And I assume that started at an early age. And we just saw a picture of you in high school. I love that picture. So tell us a little bit about your educational journey and how that has shaped, your entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah. So I was born in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Again, 45 years ago, 1977. And I was in Rio, and when one thing, of course, I come from a middle class family in Brazil, but I always had big dreams, and my father spent most of his money and the time with the kids. We are four siblings, right? My parents, they have four kids in education, so I was fortunate to study in the best schools and best universities. And when I was 16 years old, I came to the U.S. to Houston, to the Woodlands, by the way, where we did the
Oh, at the Energy Drone
drone summit.
Robotics. Yeah.
So to study, and I did my last year of high school in the Woodlands in Houston, and that was a picture in my graduation. So when I came back, well, I was 17 years old in that picture, and that was starting my international journey, like living U.S. Very like talking about 1993 to 1994. So the
Wow.
world was not as globalized as is right now. I remember I was the only foreigner in my school, and it was very the Woodlands was a very traditional city, even more in that point as well. And I started there. And when I was very young, when 22 years old, what you just said, because one of the things we're discussing before is, okay, and you're going to come up with that in our agenda is like, hey, and I don't want to spoil, but hey, how is your, what was your best boss in your life? I never had a boss because once I graduated from engineering school when I was 22 years old, the first thing I did was to start Cypher. And you're talking about end of 1999. In end of 1999, remember, internet became commercial in 95.
Wow.
iPhone, which is the real first smartphone, was launching in 2007. You're talking
Yep.
about almost 7, 8 years before any smartphones being there. Only 4 years after internet became commercial, which at that point was very early stage. Just remember, like time frame, I talk about PayPal really became PayPal in 2001. So that's very early stage there. And I have my vision that of course for me was obvious that internet will become what became now, and technology will evolve that way. And at that point, I was thinking, hey, if internet is becoming important, and I believe that e-commerce is also will be important, and that's why my picture when I started Cypher when I was 22 years old, and look very different. I tried to look very serious because I was only 22 years old starting a tech company.
Yep.
So I had to make myself serious. Even the glass was like creating a character there.
We've heard this before. There's no one path to leadership or to success. What would you say to that? What advice would you give to somebody?
So again, I'm apologizing for the cough drop.
Yeah, no worries at all.
Pop up into the cold north.
It's that time of year.
It is. Yeah. So I also, in the opening line, you talked about whether, leader read. I also don't know what the answer to that is either. I think it's probably some of both. There are some people who do have the natural talent, just like some people can pick up a football and throw it perfectly. Somebody else needs a coach to do it. I think there is a lot of development to be a good leader. There's a lot of opportunity. Mentoring being my favorite way of developing, but there's certainly coursework. But here's my advice when you're thinking about what to do. Say yes. Just say yes to opportunities when they come. Don't be afraid. Don't put yourself on a track where you can't get off. I had an eye-opening moment. This is another one of those moments where a leader did something for me, and I had this conversation with him a few years ago. They did not realize the impact he had on me. So when I was in British Aerospace, it was my first corporate job. I was over in the UK. It was a little high potential course I was in, and the chairman of British Aerospace was having dinner with us. We're sitting around smoking cigars in a castle in Ireland.
Oh my gosh.
And drinking scotch. And so people were getting pretty free with the chairman. And one guy finally said, the strategy of the company doesn't make sense. What we're trying to do doesn't make sense. I don't understand this. Nobody understands it. Why don't you fix it? And
To the chairman?
To the chairman. So you got
It's
quiet.
like, have another shot, buddy. Yeah.
So the chairman says, he thinks for a second, very dramatic, long pause out of the cigar. And he goes, there's 10 of us. Are any of you afraid of being fired today? Did any of you get up this morning and think that your job was so precarious that you would get fired? So we all had to admit, no, we're in this high-pool course. Do any of you feel as though you're not qualified for the jobs you're in? No. Do any of you feel you're not qualified for the next job you could get? No. Then you guys fix the goddamn company. Make decisions, lead, go out there and do things, and I've got your back. As long as you're trying to do the right thing for the company, I will always back you up.
Yeah.
And I said, I saw him a couple of years ago, and I related that story back to him. He didn't even remember being in the castle with us that night. But it's like my 11-year-old next door neighbor. He made such an impact on me when he said, just go do what you think is right.
Yeah.
So I say to people who are thinking about, what do I do with my career? I'd say, just say yes. Just let opportunities come to you and say yes.
Is there anything looking back that you would love to share with folks that are out there from a leadership perspective, and any advice you would give to them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think for me, and what I would strongly advise to everyone, is to find something that drives you. So fashion experience, retail experience was great. I loved what I was doing, but then something changed in your life and you are brought to the different domain. And I believe if you find something that really drives you and you have passion about this, you will be successful. At least you will get some, you will get some like motivation out of this and drive. And I also wanted to think that like try to become best, as my granddad said, in what you do, even if it's not your probably dream job yet, but you will bring this experience to your further milestone. So what I like about this current environment, when you like global world, when you can change in the industries from this world to the tech world, from fashion retail to another something. I'm not rejecting everything I have collected or have earned, like skills, network, and something. I'm just bringing all of this to my new milestone and simply connecting the dots, bringing some new value to my new like customers, partners, investors. And that's the value. So I would suggest not to be scary about this new experience. If you have passion about the new industry, try it out. You can like it.
Tell us a little bit about some of the experiences during that early career that, again, helped shape, who you are today and this idea of leading by doing.
Well, I first, this picture, there says a lot. I had the honor and privilege to meet two great people during my early career as well. One was Samuel Salomon, my co-founder, that we challenge each other every day because he's an engineer. I am a business person, and we were put in the path of collision at a global telemedicine company that we worked, and this was back in 2011, the beginning of the telemedicine expansion. So we have major clients like the VA, the DoD, NATO. We did a lot of deployments all over the world, and Samuel was responsible for the software and the systems, which makes sense, right? Imagine software controls hardware at a distance. Very similar to
Yeah,
what we do today.
right.
So he did that, so I used to travel selling. I'm still doing that. And he's there supporting, making sure that whatever I throw at him, he can do it. So I think the first was the power recognizing what you don't have, right? The wisdom and the being humble to say, I don't know this, and I have somebody here that knows best, and being able to actually work with the opposite side, right? I learned that engineers are completely different. I'm macro, I'm a systemic learner. He is a linear learner. If I don't put things in order, precision, well, I'll tell you, I married another linear engineer, so that challenges me every day. But we learned, and I have to learn to survive, right? It's not easy. And then Samuel learned. I learned a lot from him, and actually, he was the one that inspired me and to make the move and take the leap of faith and say, okay, let me join you at Speedbird. And the other one that both of us learned from, and that's the gentleman and the Dr. Osiris Silva. He's an engineer, and I had a chance to meet with Dr. Silva for 3 hours in Brazil. He is the founder of Embraer, still alive today, I think 92, 93 years of age.
Wow.
And he founded the third largest aircraft manufacturer in the world. Every aircraft, there's an Embraer aircraft taking off every 10 seconds around the world, including today. I took a picture in here in the Ramon airport in Eilat in Israel. And it's funny because there's only two aircraft. There's the E190 from Embraer, and right in front of the aircraft is the LV2 from Speedbird, waiting for the major aircraft to take off. And then we can actually do our drone operations from the airport. It's like, well, two Brazilian-made aircraft, right there. So, I think today was the highlight of my day. I showed Samuel this because that was his, how can I say, inspiration to move to Brazil where things are cheap, but we had only one chance. Just like Dr. Silva, he had a chance to do one aircraft when Brazil did not even build bicycles. Imagine aircraft.
Wow.
Okay, so that was his challenge to prove that we could do it.
So here's your 1 minute answer to this question. It's not really a 1 minute answer possible, but I'm going to throw it out there as that anyway. How do you maintain your, kind of your balance, your physical, emotional, spiritual, mental well-being? That's really hard to do, isn't it?
Well, it's hard to do. I love weather to me is a hobby. So that's my hobby. So I don't have to, I play softball, I listen to music, and I work out. So I always try to get my workouts in. I'm pretty good health. I'm pretty good, keep myself in pretty good shape. I get my sleep. I try to get my 7 hours a night, no matter what. And I try to eat well. My partner keeps putting food in front of me during the day when I'm working to make sure I'm eating well. She's really been my, my rock in this, a partner in this. And you can't do this alone, right? It's not possible. So I think overall I keep myself pretty emotionally balanced and focused, but you've seen me work, but I guess I'm built for it, right? I think I've kind of trained myself to operate like this, and I'm pretty good emotionally, pretty good health-wise.
I'm going to tell you honestly, Don, family is everything, and they're the most important thing in my life. I don't get enough time with them. Fortunately, I had a great Christmas with a lot of them here. But I will say that the balance, if anybody believes they have a perfect balance, they're probably kidding themselves. I believe that it's an everyday struggle, right? And it's a give and take. You've got to be prepared. Sometimes your professional career needs a little bit more of you. And when it takes something from you, it's also taking it from your family. You've got to find ways to recognize that and balance it. There is no perfect formula. It's an everyday struggle that's dependent on the individuals and their families. But if you lose that priority, as somebody that's actually took 3 wives before I got it right, you really want to think about that and invest in your families and make sure that you recognize that it is a struggle and you've got to continue to fight.